All right, everybody, it's time to get started. Good morning. Welcome to the April 11th, 2022 Grants Pass City Council Workshop. And we are going to start today with a discussion about some of our downtown events. Hi, Aaron.
Hi. Good morning, Mayor, Council.
DJ Phaser
is now joining.
Snow in April. It's totally awesome. I mean, that is so great. So that's exciting. With me today, also online, I think we have Jeff Voigt, who's the former TCA president, and that pertains to some of the events if you wanted to ask questions about, like the Christmas tree lighting event. And then, isn't that interesting? Christmas tree lighting event is one of the things we're talking about, and it's snowing today, so that's awesome. And then also Art Along the Road and COPA funding and the funding of these events in general. So we're having consideration for councils, considering the city's role in Art Along the Road, holiday tree event location, and program funding. So I'll start with the holiday tree, then we'll do Art Along the Road, and then we'll do COPA funding, and then conclude with council call to actions. Starting with the holiday tree, this was something that, looking back at our records, 2005 to 2009, we had a tree that was sort of on the corner of the Welcome Center and 6th Street, where our Welcome Center is. It was a smaller tree in nature, up to 28 feet in height, and it was basically put there. There was like a big, 55-gallon drum that was put there with some rocks, and it was placed there and decorated, and that was sort of like the holiday tree for the time. And then in 2010, we sort of have what we have today, which was the location on 5th Street and its current location from 2010 to present. Now, with that current location, we were able to do a number of improvements to the street and actually put a hole in the street that would provide for a tree up to the size of, say, 40 feet. So that's been in place since about 2010. The general cost for this program, looking back at our numbers, we've basically been paying about 10 grand a year. It's about half for the tree and half for the lighting and decorations and that kind of thing. So the cost to the city in the past has been, and present, is $10,000 general fund. Ultimately, moving forward, if we were to continue to say, hey, this is the tree event is our event, it'll just require a $10,000 allocation in the budget, which if we get direction like today, if you're interested, we can make sure that that's built into the budget and that would be there if that's what you want. Ultimately, 2 or 3 years ago, there was previous councils discussed the concept of trying to take a look at all the events we did, back to the 50s and all those things, and take a look and see if the community would be willing to step up and take those community events back on. At one time, a number of the events were run by the Town Center Association, but when the Town Center Association folded, the Town Center Association came to the city and had a number of events like the Wine Stroll and First Friday type of stuff, and said, what city are you willing to take up? And so we took up a number of things. We took up back to the 50s, the Christmas tree lighting, and then we've always had Art Along the Road. That's one that we started. I'll talk about that after this slide. So ultimately today, looking for council, and we'll do the call to action slide at the end. I'll bring up these 3 topics here, this being the first, is the holiday tree. We talked about the actual ownership of the event. We just need clear direction on, yes, this is our event, or do you want me to continue to try to reach out to the community to see if someone wants to take that? The other thing that was mentioned from council is alternative locations for the tree. As I mentioned, there's 2 locations that the tree was at one time, and there was actually a third location sort of by the post office also. So sort of by the post office there, in between the post office and K-Man Plaza, by the railroad track. Then also there was the location on 6 and G, and then there was also the current location today. So alternative locations would be something that council may want to discuss also on where you'd like to see that tree designated, if not on 5th Street. Art Along the Road is the second topic for your consideration direction today when we get down to the call to action. From Art Along the Road, it started, it looks like, back in 2003. Our first event was at Grants Pass High School. And then 2004 to 2008, It was on 8th Street between 5th and 6th. And then in 2009, it got moved to Riverside Park. And then in 2010, it's basically where it's been since it is like it was held last year. 8th Street between 6th and 4th Street and 5th Street between I and G Street. So the cost to that has varied over the years, anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000, depending on the year. The average probably is around $30,000. The expenditures last year for the 2021 event was $21,995. And Larry Evans, the chair for COPA, is here, and he was instrumental in making this program happen. So he's here also to answer any questions associated with this event, and also COPA funding if you have a question about it also. So ultimately with this one, your call to action today, we're asking if council is interested in continuing ownership of Art Along the Rogue, and we will need to just make sure that we have funds budgeted for that, and that we have an idea of operationally that we will be taking that on. The third item is funding for all of these, for the two events that we talked about, along with a funding request from COPA that came through strategic planning. It was a one-star item, which is that the COPA be funded by a certain percentage of lodging taxes, 2 to 12% or something along those lines, to help fund some of the things like the festive tree flags or dramatic banners or art of the month, different COPA or art projects. Current tourism allocations is 40% towards tourism promotion, which would be considered something that could be considered towards art or things like that for COPA. Fiscal year 23's recommended budget is $3.04 million of transient room tax dollars. Of that, 40% is $1.2 million. Breaking down tourism promotion of $1.2 million, we're providing the DMO with 28%, which is $852,000, and then that provides another $401,000 of flexible budget. Flexible budget that can go towards Art Along the Rogue or things like COPA art projects without a designated percentage of lodging tax there. You have that flexibility. The current allocation provides funding without any kind of restricted flexibility, although you can provide a restricted flexibility. It would require an ordinance change in your allocation of your lodging taxes. So breaking it down and then opening it up to discussion for you, Mayor and Council, are the three items that we have for you today. The holiday tree. One, does Council want to go ahead and say that a holiday tree is the city's event? And then what we'll do is in the downtown fund, which is general fund, we'll make sure we budget for approximately $10,000 for the tree event. Art Along the Rogue, we're looking for council direction. Does council want to confirm that the city's position is that we are the sponsor for this event, the main sponsor for this event? And if so, then we'd be making sure the budget reflects in the travel tourism budget that we are taking that on, and along with operationally moving forward, making sure that we're going to have that event. And that would be lodging taxes. And then the third item for your consideration is program funding, which is, does council want to provide a designated percentage of lodging tax revenues to art for COPA? And if you were to do that, there's two potential areas, depending on what the art would be. You've got a potential of taking a certain percentage and having it for travel tourism under operations, or under an LB project like we have for our parks, which is part of that as a tourism related facility of 11.6%. So those are two items that we can discuss. And Adam is also on the line. He'll have a lot of details for you if you have any specific budget questions with regards to transit room tax dollars and allocations currently right now. So with that, Mayor, I've highlighted the three items for your discussion and turn it over to you.
Okay, yeah, if we could start off with Adam letting us know what is allocated currently out of that $401,000, that'd be great.
Good morning, still Mayor and Council. This is Adam. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So the $401,000 is maximum flexibility within the tourism division. Those funds are not currently specified for any program or activity. That's just extra available funds that council can do whatever they wish with within appropriate bounds of it being directed towards tourism promotion.
So those funds are not what's being used to fund the Welcome Center or the Visitor Center?
That's correct. That $401,000 is in addition to any other specifically budgeted line items.
Okay, thank you. Council, what questions do you have for Aaron or, yeah, Val?
Yeah, I'm going to follow up kind of on Sarah's question. I know that we currently have taken the economic development Susan C. Ryder's job and split it. And one of those is going to be, am I correct, in the Welcome Center downtown and is kind of going to be helping with downtown things. I just would like to cut clarification of what that job title will be in charge of.
There's two positions. There's the economic manager who is going to be focused on the business recruitment, retention, and urban renewal agency. And then we also have an economic development specialist who's going to primarily be housed on 6 and G and will be that ambassador for the city and that link to the downtown merchants along with visitors coming into the visitor center, the Welcome Center itself. And that individual in this 6 and G station will also be the staff liaison to a couple of the advisory committees, things like COPA or travel tourism.
Okay, great. I just wanted clarification because I know last year when we were running the Art Along the Road, you know, then Susan left. It was just kind of like this hole of if there would be support moving forward with operating that event from the city.
Yeah, and that's why we've got a system in place that can help support that, and that's one of the things that's real important about getting direction now on Art Along the Road and the tree thing is just not only from a budget perspective, but also from a bandwidth perspective and making sure that we're planning for. These events take months of preparation to plan for, and so if we're going to be taking the lead on that, we just want to make sure that we're doing that and moving forward with them in a timely fashion.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Just to kind of stay on this topic, I'm a little bit unclear on the tourism allocations because last year when we went through that whole exercise of allocating and doing the new lodging tax, the reason that we only allocated 28% to the DMO was because the rest was allocated in other places. And now I'm hearing that the rest is not allocated in other places. So you know, that was long ago enough that I don't remember all the specifics, but I'm just unclear why that's freed up now when it wasn't freed up when we were having a discussion last year.
Chancellor, if I may, the main reason behind the limited flexibility last year was because we were still very uncertain about the impact COVID would have on tourism dollars. So 28% of a smaller amount of lodging tax revenue had to be spread more thin. Fortunately, over the last year, we've actually experienced quite a lot more lodging tax activity and lodging tax revenue than our very conservative estimates, which is why going forward, and hopefully those levels don't dip down again, but going forward, it does appear like we have plenty of additional resources. However, the $401,000 is a combination of the additional revenue from this year, FY22, as well as some additional revenue from what we're projecting for FY23. So that's not going to be an additional $400,000 every single year. That's just what we're going to be showing in the FY23 recommended budget.
As another example, the DMO, we were expecting and projecting back a year ago or so, maybe $600,000 or so to the DMO. And if you looked at the slide, it's now over $800,000 because of the additional revenue that we hadn't projected. So there is an increase in that dollar amount.
Okay, so with regards to the funds that are not allocated, that 400,000 is a 2-year number. So is it safe to assume that if we're having a good year, it's about 200,000 more than we were getting before? Is that fair to say?
I would say for the current budget year, which I'm referring to fiscal year 2023, I believe it's around $143,000 of additional unspecified lodging tax revenues. So 200 might be a little bit high, but as you know, another year or two in the future, that would be a relevant number, assuming that lodging tax revenues continue to increase from where they are today.
Okay, thank you.
Rick?
Aaron, under the Christmas tree, we're indicating the budget would be from the general fund. Is there an opportunity to use tourism dollars for that as well? Because it brings in people from outside the city?
So the only way that, Adam, you can add to this, but the only general tourism dollars that we could see that you'd use would be already tourism dollars that are allocated to the general fund, that's already being used. So there isn't, because the Christmas tree event is not considered a tourist event like, say, Back to the 50s or Boatnik or even Art Along the Road that actually does show some increases in lodging, etc. It's not deemed as an appropriate use if you look at the state definitions of what you're supposed to use those dollars for.
I want to jump back to the funding for just a second and clarify, we have about $150,000 to $200,000 available on an annual basis in this unallocated portion of the tourism promotions budget.
Mayor, that is what I'm showing at the moment. That is, of course, subject to actual tourism activity. There are a couple of reasons that we might have experienced increased lodging tax revenue and travel and tourism activity that may not continue. That being the fires in Phoenix and Talent, as well as some softball tournaments that were hosted here because their original locations would not permit the events to be held where they normally are. So at the moment, we don't know specifically if some of those tournaments might return back to their original locations, in which case Grants Pass wouldn't be seeing that same tourism activity. So I cannot perfectly predict if our lodging tax activity will continue to increase from where it is now. It very well could dip down.
Okay, well, it's better to be conservative. And I just also want to clarify again that the welcome centers are 100% funded outside of that particular line item, both of them. Because I know there's been some confusion about how the welcome centers would be funded.
That's correct. With the new position going in downtown, that position is significantly paid for by tourism dollars, and is also sharing some of the cost with Parks and Recreation.
Okay, Rob?
Aaron, I have a question on the Art Along the Road. It says 2021 revenues. As I remember it, and I could be off, but as I remember it, I kind of remember that the council allocated I thought it was like 10,000, and then we were going to match sponsorships. I think it was up to 5, so 5 and 5. But that's what I remember. But when it says here revenue city, 8,738. I mean, I know that we didn't allocate a really odd number like that. I think it was like 10 grand. So what's up with these figures?
That correlates to what you mentioned, the match. So we only needed to match $800 and something thousand for the program to get pulled off with the sponsorships and the ultimate expense of the program. So the only amount that we needed, because we had the sponsorships and because of the total cost of the event, we only needed to put up $8,300.
Thank you.
Other questions? I know that members of the committee are here, and Larry, are you the chair these days? Did you want to come up?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I can answer any questions. Aaron, thanks for the introduction. I just wanted to follow up on Rob's question on the budget. You are correct that the city promised 10,000 and matched an additional 5. And as we work through things, you know, we are cognizant of not overspending and getting it was a kind of a rush to get that job done and pulled together with the bands that we had and the art. So yes, we didn't spend all the money, and so I believe there is a separate fund that there's probably about $6,500 from last year that we didn't spend that was promised and allocated toward that group that maybe goes towards next year, for example. So that's kind of how that worked out from a math perspective. Yeah, any questions?
I guess, Larry, I know that this was kind of an experimental process of having the committee run it as volunteers. Sure. And what's the status from the committee's perspective on doing that again?
Yeah, I think the committee felt, and we got a little pushback last year, where half of us were on board, the other half weren't, so we just kind of divided ourselves, and a group of 4 of us decided that we'll help. We didn't want to see it go dark for a year. And so we did branch off and do that. Some of the other committee members weren't in agreement that we are technically an advisory committee, not an action committee. But this year, I think the consensus is still kind of split, where there's a group of us that want to see it move forward with a lot of direction from us. Other people want to see it go to a separate contractor that would be paid to handle that event and work with Aaron and the city to make sure it gets done without a lot of involvement with the COPA committee. We would still kind of maybe be involved with some of the design and direction, but the heavy lifting that we did last year was really a big ask for us as volunteers to pull off. We were happy to do so, and we were happy to see that it was successful, but I think since we're so far out, we're coming up on 5 months out, it might be good to entertain some professional event planners and event people that could actually handle it. It would probably cost more than what we were able to do from a volunteer basis, but I think that's kind of where we're looking this year. So, and I unfortunately am having to step down. There's so much been going on with Ukraine, and I have connections that I may be out of the country come fall, and also there's an opportunity that I may be helping with the rehabilitation of terrible Tilly Lighthouse. So I might be stuck on that rock for part of the summer, helping Mimi Morissette, who's the owner of that property. And they're turning it in, they're trying to get it to be that crematorium, or what do they call it, where they keep the urn. So there's so much going on my plate this summer that I've had to kind of reassess where I'm going to be come September, October, that I didn't see a possibility of me being able to give it my full attention, which is kind of my character, is to really dive in and give it that, make sure it happens, and I don't want to let anyone down. So at this point, I can help wherever this goes. I will be around off and on, but I can't commit to such a large undertaking this year. So I do thank you for last year and allowing us the opportunity to make it happen, and I think we were all happy with the way it turned out.
Thanks, Larry. Other questions? Brian?
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to thank you, Larry, for putting on such a good event with the committee last year, and for all your work on COPA. Yeah. So we really appreciate it. Thanks.
I know you all do, and I've been, like I said, a very great opportunity to work with you for the last 3.5 years. So, and as things smooth out, I'll try and come back, as Vanessa welcomed me at any time. So we'll go from there.
Thank you. Other questions for the committee? All right. We may have more questions as things move along, because we have kind of a complicated topic here with multiple things. But thank you, Larry. All right. Any other questions at the moment? No? Okay. Let's move into discussion here, and we have several decisions to make, I guess, regarding this topic. We have whether or not we want to fund these events and how to do that, and also whether or not we want to consider moving the tree, whether or not we want to consider hiring somebody to organize art along the road, or whether that's something that the committee can handle at a volunteer level. So I'm not sure where to start with the big stuff or the easy stuff here, but I'll just turn it over to you and whatever thoughts you have to share. Valerie, then Brian.
Well, I definitely would like to see these events happen because I believe that as a community that it's important to have these bonding activities. And I do believe, I mean, you know, the ruling is greater than 50 miles is the purpose of bringing in, the utilizing of the tourism dollars of the that we send to the destination management. And if I'm not correct, I mean, I know that last year when we went 28%, we literally stood the ground on the 28% because we did want that extra 2%. I mean, that was kind of like, we kind of knew there was going to be a point where we kind of came to this, and we do need to have a larger discussion about the events. We did hold a workshop. I mean, we had some of the people come in, but it probably needs to be followed up more so that we can kind of have some sort of future with events. I'm totally, myself, in favor of keeping the holiday tree where it is right now with our not knowing what's going on with, you know, the task force coming up. We've got the space available. I don't want to see a change at this point, so I would be in favor of seeing the $10,000 be put forth for the tree and hopefully maybe have somebody and maybe a more organized parade this year, which is something I think some of our local people have missed. And then I would be in favor of hiring an event person to put together and look at Guard Along the Road and get an idea, you know, put RFPs out to see if there is somebody willing to step forward to help us with that process as we move forward.
Brian.
I agree with Valerie. I think Art Along the Road is the easy one here to talk about, so I'm just going to talk about that one first. It sounds like funding isn't an issue. Sounds like we've got money available to do that, so it's just a matter of who we want to run it. I don't know what groups might be interested in running it with some funding, kind of more of a partnership situation than an RFP situation. It might be good to try to leverage some community group, whether that's, you know, a group that puts on another event in town already, or I know we've talked about working to help develop a downtown association. So, you know, once that group is formed and more robust, that's something that they certainly could take on with some funding, I would think. So I don't necessarily want to jump right into, you know, an RFP and trying to farm it out just because I think it's going to cost a lot more if we do it that way. Yes, Aaron? Oh.
So to help the council in the decision-making process, I think the key points that we're really looking at are, do you want to budget and take ownership for the holiday tree and for the Art Along the Road? And then do you or don't you want to try to allocate a certain percentage of lodging tax or keep it floating? And on Art Along the Road, since we're talking about that one first, it's not necessary for us to figure out who's going to be doing it or how. That's sort of our expertise to try to bring to you, just like if we own a swimming pool, we contract with YMCA versus us doing it type of thing. We just need direction on whether or not you want to do that, and then we could start focusing on the details of how that would happen.
Okay, thank you for keeping me focused. So I do think that we should fund the tree. I do think we should fund Art Along the Road. I also think that we should fund a 4th of July fireworks celebration, which is not up here, but that's a discussion that is definitely within this purview, and I would be interested if any other counselors would be interested in discussing funding a community fireworks celebration in town. And then the lodging tax question is a little more complex, so I want to hear what other people have to say.
Vanessa.
I also support the city moving forward with the holiday tree event, funding that through the general fund. Also sponsoring Art Along the Road through the floating TLT. Since we only have 5 months for that, I would support moving forward with a professional event planner. And I do support providing COPA with 3.5% of that $401,000 flexible budget. That would provide about $14,000 annually.
Is that separate from the events?
That would be the third slide deck. Committee on Public Art Program funding.
Yep. Rick. Oh, Rick, then DJ.
I'm in favor of funding the Christmas tree from general fund and funding Art Along the Road with the tourism dollars, and then proceeding whatever needs to be done for having those events proceed. Thank you.
Thanks. DJ.
Yeah, I'm in favor of the tree, Art Along the Road. Also, as Brian mentioned, fireworks show, I think I'd like to add that into here. I had a lot of input from constituents wanting that, and I haven't heard of any groups stepping up to do it, so I think it's a appropriate discussion. As far as the funding sources, my opinion would be for staff to evaluate the appropriateness of tourism lodging tax dollars for these events. If it's appropriate, I would have no problem with that. If it's inappropriate, I would have no problem allocating general funds. So I think that's direction enough. Also, have staff look into, as Aaron mentioned, how they are going to do it. You know, wrap us up a memo or something if you can find a group or partnership willingness, or even an event organizer of some kind. Thanks.
Thanks, DJ. Joel, then Kurt.
Well, the sense of community is very powerful in all three events. I had a question. You know, Vanessa talked about the, what, 3.5%? Along with that, graffiti, how do we presently fund taking care of graffiti and removing graffiti? Or do we?
We do have a small fund for dealing with graffiti. We know that that's an important issue that has to be touched on immediately. And so we do have that in place and budget through that, through operations.
So I was wondering, I don't know if we want to do it or not, but maybe increasing that percentage a little bit. When you have art, it kind of attracts some graffiti, and we want to maintain it. We don't want to just put it up there and have it defaced. Plus the other graffiti in the community that is artwork that really isn't doesn't contribute to the sense of community that we want to foster. So that's just a thought.
I think that's a good thought for a discussion about the public art, maybe rather than the tourism funding, but it's a good thought. Kurt and Val?
Personally, I'm ambivalent about the tree, but I don't see it as a tourism event at all, so I think that the city should just support the tree out of general fund as a celebration for itself. And the Art Along the Road, we should definitely go ahead and support in whatever way we can. If we can take and hire somebody to partner that event, then we should do that. So I would say general fund for the tree and tourism for the art.
Valerie?
I think if we had more evidence that Art Along the Road brought in people from outside, and maybe that could come through, and I think that they've talked about doing some type of hotel surveys and that sort of thing, and as they move forward for measurement purposes of getting better idea of where people come from. I can see it down the road perhaps happening, but at this point in time, I'm not sure that that can be shown to be anything more than just a local. So I think that's a moving target. I do agree that the tree is just a city event for our purpose of bonding, and that is important. I will say that during strategic planning, I want to say for 2 years now, the Committee of Public Art has come to us and asked for maintenance for art, because they do, you know, the art projects that we have around town take maintenance, and there is no funding set up for the maintenance at this point in time. So I think that kind of goes right along with, you know, what Vanessa brought up. You do have, and even the graffiti, because, you know, those sorts of things you need to be able to get on top of and make sure that they are maintained so they don't deteriorate, and two, that there is no graffiti that destroys them. So I do think that's a very valid request. I'm not exactly sure if it can become a percentage of the floating fund or how that works, but I do think that the maintenance and some sort of ongoing funding source for that is important.
I'll jump in and say that I think actually the tree, I think everybody's selling the tree short. It has not been marketed as an event for people to come here from more than 50 miles away, but I think that shopping in our downtown is a really nice Christmas time activity, and I can tell you all that personally, I've been to Ashland, Leavenworth, Washington, Germany, Mount Angel, Oregon, you know, all just to visit their towns and do shopping during Christmas season. So I think with the right effort and promotion we also have the other artwork, the nutcrackers and the lighted Christmas displays. We could, you know, continue to build that up, and I think it does it maybe has not brought people in, but I think it's part of the ambience that could bring people in. All that to be said, it sounds like we have strong support for continuing to sponsor Art Along the Road and the Christmas tree, and we need to figure out exactly how we're going to fund those. A couple of people have also mentioned 4th of July fireworks, which I think is another thing that kind of got left on the wayside when we went to this, when we changed our tourism program. And Vanessa brought up, we haven't really discussed allocating these a certain percentage to the committee, but if people want to chime in on that. Yep, Aaron.
As an additional details, we didn't highlight it. We mentioned it, it's in the presentation, but maybe Adam can sort of discuss from a financial perspective pros and cons of the dedication of transient lodging tax dollars for COPA versus non-dedication, and to provide you an opportunity to maybe make a more informed decision on which way you'd like to go.
Okay, go ahead. Adam.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. I would say that the current structure of our lodging tax allocations provides council all of the flexibility it could possibly need in order to fund such activities and programs without restricting flexibility for future years by making some sort of ordinance change or by guaranteeing a specific calculation and then tracking remaining funds, versus with our current structure, we simply budget for that activity. It's part of the budget and would continue as council desires, part of the tourism budget. What that does is, in any given future year, if priorities were to change or if there was some sort of emergency, the budget as is would have the flexibility to adapt to either the circumstance or to council's priority. So I believe that's all I had to add to this particular note.
Valerie.
I have a question, Adam. I know that there is a certain amount of money dedicated to tourism facilities. Would that stretch apart to art that's in the community that brings people in terms of maintenance?
It is 11 point, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I was just saying in the current allocation, I know that is a part that is, you're saying it's 11.5, and so go ahead, I cut you off.
Yes, 11.67% of all of the available lodging tax dollars are transferred to the Lands and Buildings Capital Project Fund for parks acquisition, development, or tourism-related facilities. So if there was some sort of large project that council wanted to prioritize, then there are funds currently available to do that sort of thing. With that particular allocation, there might be a little more competition for those dollars, as right now, parks have mostly been the recipient of those funds. But with council's direction, we can alter the allocations in whichever direction council would prefer us to go. So there is already that funding mechanism currently.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Brian.
I just wanted to clarify Councilor Ogier's allocation. You said 3.5% of the 400,000. So when you calculate that as a portion of the total amount, it's not 3.5%. It's closer to like 0.5%. Is that accurate?
Do you mean before we pay out to the DMO, when you say the
Right.
full amount?
Yeah.
I didn't configure it based on that.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying. That would be accurate. Her percentage is based on the flexible amount that's left over after everything's currently allocated. So her recommendation was, yeah, put something there, but not change the current formulas.
Okay. Thanks.
Joel?
And as we do that, then if there was a need for additional dollars there, we have that 11.6% that can be applied. It's just in a bigger pot. So if there was a need at one point in time where the priority shifted to need even more dollars, then that pot's already there. Just has to compete in the pot. Am I correct? Yeah.
It is snowing. Brian?
Oh, I was just hoping to maybe get a little more commentary from other counselors about the 4th of July. I heard from DJ and was curious what other counselors thought.
Rob?
Yeah, I very much support the fireworks show, public fireworks show on the 4th. It's great because we could set that up in a really safe way with public safety nearby and monitoring and all that stuff, which is a really good example for the public to see. But people will love it. I mean, there's, who doesn't like fireworks? So I think that's a good thing that we should get back to. And as I've mentioned before, I know we were told that fireworks were purchased for 2020. I don't know if you can return them, and I don't know if the person who bought them returned them, but in council chambers, council was told that like in 19 or whatever, that the fireworks were ready for the next year. So we may actually still even have them around for one show.
Rick?
I'm also in favor of proceeding with trying to put on the fireworks show. Also, we're many years ago at Coos Bay, and they put on the fireworks show, and they had a loudspeaker, and before each firework went up, it was announced who sponsored that firework. So you had different businesses willing to pick that up, so that would also be an opportunity to maybe enhance the amount of fireworks we have. Thank you.
Kurt, then Valerie?
Definitely support that. I think that I like the way the fireworks are done at Boatneck. I've always enjoyed those more than the fairgrounds. So I would consider, because the river is our river, that maybe we consider doing it down at the river.
I believe, before we have a lengthy discussion about that there's an issue with the trees, and that doing it at the sports park and Parkside Elementary, kind of back up to each other, that there's just more open area. Valerie?
Yeah, I also remember something about that as to the reason why when John Bowen went out to put it on, he couldn't use the park during that. I think maybe because it was in fire season, July. They could do them in May, but May was not and July was. So I think that was the issue. I'm in support as well. I will say I'd like to get other community people coming forward to support it, which once again, you need a base. I will say that Active Club at one point in time, when we did have that, stepped forward and said they were somewhat interested. But I think where we're at right now with a lot of people coming on board is they don't understand, or everybody's a little leery because they don't know what it means for the city to separate for it. So that's why I have mentioned to Aaron having some of those people who were here before come forward and have that discussion to make sure that we lay out the parameters as we move forward as to how to make that distance happen. Because we can't guarantee that every year we'll have this amount of money and every year we'll do a 4th of July event. This year, obviously, we've done well. I think it's great. I think it's a great opportunity. I hope that indeed the school district will come along with us as they did and let us use our sports park along with their school. So I really would like to see it happen, but I do also think this is a discussion that needs to be had between a lot of the players in town as to how to move forward with events.
Any further discussion? Brian?
I just wanted to ask staff on the 4th of July specifically if they see any issue with the timeline being relatively short and being able to pull that off in the next, or 3 months from now.
Yes.
How significant?
Greatly based on my limited knowledge, so that gives you a small percentage of certainty. But I will get back to you if this is something that sounds like council's wanting us to pursue. We'll do 100% our best to make it happen, but I will be realistic and give you the information as I find it and determine if that is something that we could even do for 22. When you mentioned 4th of July, I was thinking 23, but.
All right, well, it sounds like council is interested in having a council kind of city-sponsored 4th of July event. So let's get some more information on that, as well as having staff evaluate whether that the Christmas tree and Art Along the Road are appropriate events for tourism funding. I'm still not quite sure where we're at on the committee allocation. Go ahead, Rick.
I think one of the main hurdles to overcome would be finding somebody that's able to set off the fireworks. I realize sponsorship is one aspect, but the other aspect is having a certified person. We used to have somebody that used to live here in town, I don't believe does it anymore, and so that may be one of the challenges. Thank you.
And another challenge will be, if you order the fireworks, are you going to get them in time? Because there's some chain supply issues that it seems like everything takes twice as long to get as it did before.
All right. We'll leave this to staff to research out. We don't need to plan the event on the dais here. Further discussion about this 3.5% proposal. Do we need to just get more budget information? Go ahead, Vanessa.
Yeah, I was also going to ask for a discussion on that topic as well. This is an ask from COPA out of our strategic planning, and it also did make it onto our strategic planning list. So I'd like to hear what other councilors think about it.
It was a 1%, wasn't it? I'm trying to think of what percent I think what they did, because they did come forward at one point. I think the point was 1% of it. So I don't know. I'd have to get more information as to what, exactly that number means. So I think at this point in time, it's a very valid. I support having something, but I think it would be a workshop, whole nother workshop discussion.
Brian?
Yeah, I support it as well. I think we need a little bit more specifics on exactly how the numbers work out, but if it's only 0.5% of the total amount, I would be comfortable with that.
Joel?
Yeah, I was going to say 0.5% is almost a no-brainer in terms of continued funding for it. But the other thing I would want to make sure that we can is that it includes maintenance, and that we're just not putting things out there to be defaced.
Okay, well, it sounds like that is a topic for another day, and I'm going to request that we have some budget charts that show us all the tourism funding, tourism promotion funding, as well as any general fund allocations that may be appropriate for these events. And I would also like to just see where that Welcome Center funding comes into play as well.
Certainly, Mayor, we can get a memo out to you on that. The travel tourism dollars is a very extensive hierarchy family tree. It goes all over the place, so it'll be on an 11.5 by 17, but we'll get it to you.
Sounds good. Anything further on this one today? All right. Next up, we have a presentation on our buildable lands and annexation. And you all should have a fairly good size printout in front of you. Oh, and here we're coming with the packets.
Good afternoon. I'm going to take the bulk of this, but I did want to mention that we have a representative from DLCD, Department of Land Conservation and Development, joining us on the phone. Kevin Young is a senior planner in Salem with DLCD and has many years of background in the administration of buildable lands and working with urban growth boundary in the state, statewide. So hopefully Kevin's on. He was going to try to be on about 12:30. I know that he does have to leave early, but I think we'll be able to have hopefully have him here as a resource for you. So primarily, staff's understanding of this presentation today was educational. I succumbed to a bit of a critique of urban planners, and that's to give you a lot of words. So you got a large memo last week. I'm going to try to just kind of hit the highlights on that memo for you. The subject and summary is here, discussion regarding background and data related to the amount and availability of buildable lands in the urban growth boundary. And then just a brief statement about the annexation process. And then this relates to the council goals to facilitate sustainable and manageable growth. So this topic, in terms of how much land does the city have available for urbanized residential development, and again, today's topic is really residential. We're not talking about the employment lands. Is one that's been talked about off and on for a while, and particularly it ties into the housing challenges that the city has. I included, and unfortunately there was too much of it, there was an attachment on that memo from the 2018 study by Eco Northwest that had a lot of material that actually did not directly relate to buildable lands inventory. But the first few pages of it did have some pieces, so I included that. That was done in 2018, still has some relevance, I think. And two findings back then were that there is a lack of vacant land in large parcels in particular. That was called out by Beth Goodman, the author of that memo. And then a lack of vacant land with services. So those are kind of two barriers that were identified in 2018. Related to that, the Housing Advisory Committee's 2020 work plan had two topics related to this, and that was finish the existing urban growth boundary expansion area rezoning and analyze the incorporation of urban reserve lands into the urban growth boundary. And then the City Council and your work plan and your strategic plan have also identified the urban growth boundary rezoning as a priority. So the question about availability and amount. On the first topic, we really don't have a lot of influence, if you will, on the availability, meaning marketability or being available to develop to urban densities, new housing to urban densities, if it's owned by private parties. That's obviously out of our control, but in terms of using surplus public land or land banks, you heard from Amber a couple weeks ago on that. Those are areas where we could maybe have a little bit more influence on the availability. The majority of what today's conversation is about is really the amount, and there's two main areas that we can influence that. You can either, we have what we have already in the urban growth boundary. So that could be expanded. I'll mention later that that's probably not a feasible option because of the recent housing needs analysis stating that we already have sufficient buildable lands inside the urban growth boundary. But in terms of what's a tool to increase the amount of buildable land, that is one. Another would be to rezone land that's already inside the urban growth boundary to some, to residential land. That's the process that you are well aware of and we've been working towards. Since you are familiar with it, I'm not going to go into much detail on this slide other than to say we have been putting quite a few resources into this idea of rezoning the remaining 540 acres that the city has in its urban growth boundary that is not city zoned. As you know, we cut that back recently to focus just on Allen Creek. So that is moving ahead. We do have David Evans and Associates preparing a traffic impact analysis right now. And they're working on that. We hope to have that in a couple of months, and then we'll send that to ODOT. Assuming that they sign off on it, then we'll proceed with the formal rezone of that 60 acres along the Allen Creek area. Two other actions related to buildable land supply that we've been working on over the last 12 to 18 months. One is the housing needs analysis, and the other is housing production strategy. These are both mandated by the state. The housing needs analysis is completed. It's already had a public hearing at the Planning Commission, and you have your public hearing here in just a couple of weeks. The housing production strategy is basically taking that housing needs analysis and saying what are the strategies specifically that the city of Grants Pass can use that's relevant to us, tapping into the regional housing needs analysis that was done for our entire region by the state a few months ago. And that's underway. There's already been one meeting. Councilor Lovelace has mentioned there's another meeting coming up on April 15th. And that's an 11-month contract that the city has with Eco Northwest. So we'll be bringing that to you, updates here and there in terms of, what are some of the recommendations that are coming along the way. But at the end of the day, that's probably going to be our most specific document that we're going to have, and we're going to be putting time and energy towards for developing, building up, the inventory of housing. Now, this is not just related to the availability or the amount of buildable lands. It really covers the full spectrum, but we do anticipate the housing production strategy to have, some of those elements in it. I just touched on some of this slide here. The OAR, Oregon Administrative Rules 660, is kind of where most of the land use documentation or rules are. That does talk about an estimate of buildable lands in the UGB. The next couple bullets, starting in the middle there, working down, are what our draft housing needs analysis came back with, and this was completed back in May. There's 4,640 gross developed acres of residential land and 1,031 of gross vacant residential land, totaling 5,671. Now these numbers are always in flux, so take them, hold them fairly loosely in that respect. So if you take out all the environmentally constrained lands and then the non-exempt vacant lands from the 1,031 vacant, then you get 360 acres of vacant buildable residential land. And again, these terms are not the ones that we come up with. The terms vacant and partly vacant are actually defined in Oregon statute. So when they prepared our housing needs analysis, these are done the same throughout the state of Oregon in terms of how you define what these are. So as they kind of self-describe, vacant doesn't really have any structures, $10,000 or less of value that are on that piece of ground. Partly vacant typically is where there's one house, maybe two houses, but there's a half acre or more of vacant land that's on that parcel that could also presumably at some point be redeveloped or newly developed. So if you add those together, the totally vacant and then the partly vacant, you get around 1,300 acres of land that's in the urban growth boundary that is considered really buildable. Now a lot of that is small. This came up a couple of weeks ago. 34% are on lots less than an acre in size, and 44% are on lots 1 to 5 acres. And we only have 2 lots that are in our urban growth boundary that are 10 acres or larger that are vacant. So there's a number of rules, as I mentioned, related to how do you actually go about expanding the urban growth boundary. And this is part of the definition that we're looking at here. That second bullet, residentially designated land, including both vacant and developed land, likely to be developed that is suitable, available, and necessary for residential uses. And then publicly owned land is taken out of this calculation, not considered available. So that, of course, has some interest for us, because if the city owns it, it was not factored into the analysis, but if the city chooses to make that land available for residential development, it bumps those numbers up a little bit. And then at the bottom there is just, again, some of the statute or the rules language from OAR 660 that talks about what exactly is suitable and available. This is a chart that's taken from our housing needs analysis that is underway, and you'll be seeing the full document here in a couple of months at a public hearing. I just wanted to point out the 20-year demand of 4169. That's a total demand in residential units that's forecasted there. And the net buildable land that came out of this, 674 acres. And then you can see the average densities there, and they're kind of broken out, but I mainly wanted to highlight that 674 number. Oregon statute do not allow buildable lands to factor in existing housing deficits, so this is another piece of the puzzle for us as we're working through it locally, and as we dive more into our housing production strategy, we're going to definitely be looking, at how does that weigh in. But when you look at the housing needs analysis here in your hearing in a couple of weeks, all those numbers do not include any current deficits. And they also don't include, or the rules don't allow the municipality to consider the market availability of that vacant land. And then I just give an example there. So the draft buildable lands inventory findings do conclude that the existing amount of vacant, partly vacant land is sufficient for our 20-year need. So that's really the bottom line here, is using the state's methodology, using the calculations that we're required to use. This is what this study comes out and says, is that they're actually today forecasted for the next 20-year period is sufficient, and that does not include the urban reserve. You can see these in more detail in your packet. There's some printed maps here. All of the colored areas are the vacant or partially vacant residential land that is within our urban growth boundary. And there is, and you'll see this when you get the full document here in a couple of weeks, but there's cross-hatched areas on a lot of these, and those mean that they're partially vacant, and you can see a lot of parcels are partially vacant. So this is the north area, much less acreage, mostly built out. Here is kind of the central area on the west side, again, fairly sparse, mostly partly developed lands that are in acreages that are 1 acre or less. Here's the central area on the east. Again, we're just talking residential lands, and you can see the darker color is the high density residential. So when we're talking about the sort of that 10 units per acre and above, those kind of developments, that's what's anticipated in these dark areas. The orange ones are kind of the high, and then the yellows are more of your mediums and lows. Already talked about this, housing production strategy underway, kicked off in January. The Housing Advisory Committee does have a subcommittee that's been formed that's going to be monitoring that process. The comprehensive plan that we have adopted talks specifically about here's the steps that you need to do if you're going to expand the urban growth boundary and the urban reserve. And the city, of course, did this in 2014. It was adopted, so we're 8 years through that 2014 urban growth boundary adoption now. So kind of still in that first half, and one would anticipate that as we now do a new housing needs analysis and it's still showing that there's enough there, that it's likely that here's what you could do to follow the steps to expand the boundary, but likely that would not be successful effort at this point. So basically, again, there's 11 steps here that our comprehensive plan outlines that we need to do. And then I talked a little bit about the urban reserve earlier. That's the green on this map. So we don't have any urban reserve really on the north, other than a little bit over kind of in this Dollar Mountain area. The majority of it is south of the river and west. We have a little bit down here in the kind of the Clover Lawn area. Under statute, you can take an urban reserve up to 30 years in addition beyond the urban growth boundary. We chose to do 10. So the urban growth boundary is the 20 years land supply, and then you have the urban reserve, which is another 10 years. So those are basically the targeted areas that once you start bumping up against that number where you don't have enough land projected to meet the 20-year supply, then you start using the green areas first. Yeah, we talked about that. There's coordination with either urban growth boundary discussions, urban reserve discussions with Josephine County. That's kind of a given. It's under their jurisdiction now. And then these are just some more statutes that are under the Oregon Revised Statute 197A related to lands and how to include them. They have to be sort of a tiered approach on how you look at those. The marginal lands have to be evaluated first, and then if you don't meet those, then you look at agriculture and forest use lands. The 660-02-440 says that a local government can review and amend the urban growth boundary in consideration of one category of land need, for example, housing need, without a simultaneous review and amendment in consideration of other categories. So if the council has any interest in pursuing that further, hopefully Kevin with the DLCD can expand on that. I'm not personally familiar with how that works, but the clause is there and is in the statute. The last couple slides are more explanation about if you choose to proceed, you have to establish a study area, and it kind of talks about how you go about doing that. There's a preliminary study area that has to include land within a different urban growth boundary, or the corporate limits of a city within a different urban growth boundary. Lots of findings about how you set up that study. So I guess my point in the memo here was it's a fairly lengthy, challenging process. I already mentioned that the projections show that that our current supply is sufficient. The other option is to focus on the rezoning of the land inside the urban growth boundary, which we've been doing. And then finally, the annexation topic was brought up. Wanted to get a little bit more touch on that a little bit. The last few pages of your memo, kind of summarize what the different steps towards annexing land are. I didn't go much into that because if the topic is how do you increase the supply of land for urban residential development, this in Grants Pass right now and historically hasn't really had an effect because we have service and annexation agreements that even if you're not annexed, you can still build, density at city densities. That being said, we at staff are preparing a recommendation for you here in the next couple of months to really start moving away from the service and annexation agreements and just requiring that land be annexed as a developer sort of on a case-by-case basis, which is by far the most common practice in the state, rather than just letting people stay in the county and develop with the city urban density. You require them to actually annex at the time that they develop. So that kind of where we want to go with that. There are some annexations, in particular Blackberry, that you heard about recently, as well as some other subdivisions that we certainly can work with in proceeding to annex. We do have that ability under the statute to proceed with those because they have signed a consent to annex. So that's what we have. I guess I just wanted to verify if Kevin, can you unmute? Are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Good.
Thanks for joining.
You bet.
It's a question time. Does anybody have questions? Valerie, then Joel?
Yes, I'm going back to where you talked about the services that need to be provided. Let's see, it says the amount and availability of buildable lands, they need to have services. Well, services is a broad phase. What kind of services are you requiring? Does that mean water and sewer? Does that mean transportation? I'm curious as to what services need to be in place.
All the above, the ones that you mentioned for sure, sewer, water, stormwater, transportation. And those really were, in terms of looking at whether those services could be available, is already been done. The master plans that were adopted in 2016, that the city has looked at the entire urban growth boundary and showed that those are there or could be there.
So if we were to take a look at that then as we move forward and try to perhaps put development in areas where we felt we could get the best bang for the buck, then we have that information, those master plans that we can go to and take a look at. Is that what you're saying? So the information is there for us if we want to provide services to allow for more housing to go there, and in terms of like ARPA or whatever. So we could take a look at that and get an idea of where would be the strategic places to perhaps place some of that infrastructure. Am I correct?
Yes, and maybe Jason wants to chime in too, but what's not been done is sort of that site level, analysis. I mean, those master plans are just that. They're very high level, and showing that, the treatment plants have capacity, showing that, there's the ability to put in pipe sizes that can accommodate whatever that new growth is. But I didn't want it to be misleading that the actual study to show how a specific parcel is going to get, served with all those urban services has been done. The same thing with the transportation system plan that we adopted a couple of years ago. That also is sort of at that master planning level, and doesn't mean that a developer is exempt from doing a transportation impact analysis or something like that. So we have kind of the guidebook, if you will, and showing what is needed to serve those areas. But if you were to choose ARPA, to use some ARPA money, my understanding is that could be used to do further detailed studies. on a particular area that would give, that, as well as put in the infrastructure if it's needed.
And I'll just ask, currently we have the transportation impact study being done by ODOT, am I correct, on the Allen Creek area? Was that the only area? Or we are getting, because we had to get a transportation impact. And it's my understanding that they're doing it in Allen Creek now. And is that the only place that we've said it needs to, because we can't, and I do know, having been with ODOT, we can't do any building until we have, in that 500 and some acres, until we have a transportation impact assessment done as we slowly bring those in. Am I correct?
Yes, that is correct. And Allen Creek is the only one. It's not, ODOT's not doing it. It's the study's being done by David Evans.
Okay, all right. But it is ODOT's requirement that we get that done.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Brad, I just want to check out an assumption. So the lack of large contiguous buildable lots greater than 20 acres or whatever is not a justification for expanding the urban growth boundary under state law. That was my assumption from your presentation.
That is my understanding. I don't know if, Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
You're right. No, that is correct. It would not be a valid basis for a UGB expansion.
It's interesting that is a limitation, but it's under state law. It's not allowed to expand the growth boundary. Those laws are tough. Especially on the marginal forest land where it's really not commercial. So then the other question I had was we've already identified ARPA-wise, the other limitation, which is providing those services, as Val talked about. And I assume then that, this is my question, I assume then that if that is something that the council wants as a group, that you'll come back with prioritization of areas and dollars and projects for where that could be implemented.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do I have a correct understanding on that?
Yes, and we've already, done some analysis on, sort of where are those pockets. And we've had some conversations with Justin Gerlitz, for example, who, as you know, is working with property owners all the time, and also has a pretty good grasp on where those are. So we could fairly easily bring to the council, sort of those areas that are some of the, there's really, I wouldn't call any low-hanging fruit per se, because the reason they're not developed now is because they've been challenging to develop for many years.
Sure.
But if there's an infusion of money through ARPA that could assist with, expanding into those areas. Yeah.
Money seems to solve everything. The other question I had was, a potential tool that was mentioned was the rezoning of lands within the urban growth boundary to residential. And I just wondered what the percentage of lands that are zoned as residential in our city is, and how does that compare to other cities? Do we have a smaller percentage than what other cities have of residential, or is it larger, or where are we at there? And just to ascertain as to whether we want to entertain that option.
We're definitely in that median range. It's 65 to 75%.
Okay, so we're not an outlier there by any means. Okay, I wouldn't expect us to be. Okay. Thank you.
Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. You touched on the rezoning, and in the Eco Northwest report, it touches on that too. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is that it's talking about more of a rezoning, more of an upzoning, like if it's taking something that is, for example, maybe an R2, and if it's an appropriate location, make it an R3 or something, so it allows for higher density. So that was my interpretation of that piece.
And we do have opportunities to do that. In fact, we've done that.
Yep. But my question is, it's actually more just about the Allen Creek project in general, because that's where we're expanding right now. That's where a lot of our efforts are to expand. And I'm just wondering if you have any idea or can give us like very rough timelines of like, when we might be seeing, for example, the road going through, and just just so we can have a sense of how long it's going to take to get that area built out.
Yeah, I'll look over to Jason. I know that Dowell is the engineering firm that has been designing this, and I know that there's some preliminary drawings.
Yeah, and we'll be, I believe we actually talk about it a little bit in the special meeting coming up, and Wade can give you a better sense of the timeline at that time. But we're moving forward at a pretty good pace. We're starting the surveying work so that we can finalize the design, which then leads to right-of-way acquisition. I'm guessing construction within a 2-year window. It's going to move pretty quick.
Okay, that sounds good. And then, so after the city kind of finishes up its portion of the Allen Creek improvements that we're responsible for, would you envision us looking at another one of these urban growth boundary areas and doing something similar? Like, would we kind of finish Allen Creek and then we'd take on another one?
I think that's definitely in the cards, yeah. You know, each one, the transportation impact analysis is gonna, you know, have a different expense to it, just depending on the area, depending on the intersections that are involved. You know, I know there was quite a bit of interest in looking at you can see on those maps, the southwest areas where we have probably the majority of our vacant developable land. Well, that's also got the intersection of 199 and Dowell, 199 and Hubbard, you know. So those transportation impact analyses are probably going to be more than the $25,000 to $30,000 that we're currently spending for Allen Creek. But that being said, if the council chooses to put some resources there, we could do a similar process.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Doug's here from the Housing Advisory Committee. You want to come up and speak, Doug?
Yeah, thank you. I was hoping to add a little bit to, I'm glad you're looking at urban growth boundary expansion and asking for this presentation and everything. And I want to touch on the fact that the future urban growth boundary expansion, 20 years from now, when we'll start to redo this, a lot of the formula they use to allow for urban growth expansion is the amount of density we have. So what you did the other night to require density is going to help us 20 years from now take on new urban growth boundaries. So it was a smart thing to do, and it's really needed. So appreciate that. One of the other things I want to talk about was in the process of finding new buildable lands, urban growth boundary is the sort of the topic of today. Part of what allows that land to get built on is the process that you all have and the county has in allowing that land to transfer from county to city zoning to then get developed. And I think there's some things that we should do in those processes. I'm personally in the middle of it with the All Care Foundation to look at a piece of land to do that with. And I think a worthwhile exercise to do here is to hire a consultant, some outside person to do a little audit of that process. Because it's not just the same thing to say, here's this urban growth boundary land, but what's it take to get somebody to build on it? And I think we could probably audit that process and find some ways to say, okay, if you eliminated this requirement, you might speed things along. You may have to mortgage a few things into the future, such as maybe you don't require sidewalks when you're far enough away from town, and then they just pay maybe 40% of money into the sidewalk fund or something like that. So you may have to mortgage some things in the future, but I think that whole process needs to be looked at as well. It's not just enough to say what lands are out there in the urban growth boundary and what can we do to bring them in, but what's our process to actually get things built on it. And then after saying that, Brad would have to chime in here, but I'm not sure staff really has the capacity to audit that. I think that's something that has to be done by outside consultants. One of the things over the past 4 or 5 years is the Housing Advisory Committee, we've gone through and we've said, here are these tools, but a lot of what feels slow is the capacity of staff to implement the tools or to do the research and do all that, because they're probably still 1 or 2 people behind. I think you're still trying to hire 1 or 2 more staff persons, right? So we can say we want to do this and tell staff to do it and everything, but I think they just don't have the capacity for it. And if we really want to put some real energy into getting this done, probably have to put some money maybe into some consultants or something like that to come in and look at both processes and finding other ways of implementing the tools that we have.
Thank you, Doug. Are there any questions? No? All right, council, was there anybody who wanted to discuss this? All right, I mean, I believe that this discussion was prompted by council, but Valerie?
Well, the only thing I want to add, and I know some people think I'm against the density, and I'm really not against the density, but I think one of the things to me that is most important to all of this is that we bring our local builders on board as we go through these discussions, because we can make all the rules that we want to make and tell them that we need this, that, or whatever, but we need to make sure that they have the tools to do it as well. And so you always need to look at, and I've said this a million times, the financing that goes behind these projects and who, and can they get financing for these and how does that work? You know, that's a piece that we don't really look at, but, you know, I can tell you right now, you know, just in the affordable housing project that we're working on, and I know I watched through the paper as Medford makes their affordable housing projects. The affordable project in Medford right now took $4 million from their Medford Urban Renewal District, along with a gift of 3.5 acres, just to be able to go to the state to get funding and conventional banks to get funding. So it is so convoluted and difficult to get the funding for these that my thoughts are that, you know, I love getting them, I want to get them, we need to do that, but we also need to incentivize the people that are building in our area to go and build more density and find out what do they need to build on these smaller lots. What will make them do it? What will we do to incentivize you to build duplexes and triplexes on this property? Because that's really what's going to get it out of us. It's not the big pie in the sky affordable housing state project. So I just want to make sure that that's, you know, a part of the discussion is bringing in our local builders. And this plan that we're making up now, which is an action plan, is supposed to be specifically dedicated to what we're going to do in Grants Pass. So I will continue to get builders involved with the discussion.
Brian?
Yeah, I agree with Valerie. One of the things in the Eco Northwest report that they recommended is increasing outreach and communication with the development community. So that's a piece that we need to continue to follow through on as these programs are developed. And then I also agree with Valerie saying that we need to incentivize developers to build the housing that we need built in the community. You know, in addition to minimum density requirements, the idea of a density bonus, if you're able to build above 80% or a 90% density, I think would be a good way to incentivize builders to give us that higher density building that we need. The Eco Northwest report also has a bunch of other recommendations, but I don't know that it's appropriate to go over them now. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right. We will move on to agenda setting then. So our next meeting is a workshop next Monday. Well, first, I guess I'll just note we're having a special council meeting immediately following agenda review here, so don't run off. But next week, our workshop has community pool options and a discussion on our ARPA allocations, which should specifically include urban campground funding too. And then we have a meeting coming up next Wednesday with a public hearing on an ordinance that would amend the development code. It's a second reading of last week's discussion, amending development code Article 12 for minimum residential densities, a public hearing on our needs analysis, middle housing code, comprehensive plan amendment, a public hearing on the CDBG, that's Community Development Block Grant Needs and Priorities for the fiscal year 2022, year 3. And a public hearing on an ordinance property line vacation between tax lots 301 and 302 of map number 360528C0. I do not have the address in front of me. And council action items are a resolution to, there's a request for a grant extension on the Three Peaks Holding Bragg grant, a resolution that would renew the Chamber of Commerce contract. Consent calendar has a motion that would approve the findings of fact for Development Code Article 12 text amendment for minimum residential density action plan. Resolution to purchase a vehicle, a replacement vehicle for the battalion chief. Resolution to purchase playground equipment for Westone Park. A resolution to redefine the scope of the Caveman Plaza Task Force. Resolution to contract for parks janitorial services. A resolution to make a membership change for the Housing Advisory Committee. A resolution to revise the banner policy. A resolution for a law enforcement mental health and wellness grant, and a resolution that would approve the downtown parklet program. Any questions about anything coming up next week? Brian?
It's a general agenda item that's not next week, but back, it wasn't too long ago, but we had discussed getting reviewing the results of the bulk water rate increase that we did last year, and we're getting very close to watering season, so I was kind of hoping that we could address that before we get too far into spring here. And I'm not seeing it on the agenda other than in the memo section on the back, but I don't see any discussion scheduled.
Yeah, I think the plan was to move that into a memo and then see if council wanted to discuss it, but did the memo not get done? Is that? Go ahead, Aaron.
So that was on the council agenda like a week or two ago, and it got moved into memo for that reason, to maybe get just the information out. If there's actual discussion or potential action that council may want to have and it's already known, then maybe we just need to move to a workshop and not have it as a general information in a memo. But that's ultimately up to council to determine if you believe it's a memo workshop or just go to a straight workshop.
Could I ask Jason anecdotally what it looked like last year compared to the previous years as far as usage with bulk water?
Last year, usage was excessively high. We anticipate this year it's going to be significantly lower. There's been some changes at the state legislature, which has different requirements for haulers in regards to where they can take their water and how we have to track it. So I actually expect to see a reduction this year.
Okay, then I think a memo is probably appropriate for now.
I figured if the memo could give us the background information, and then if council was interested in changing it, we could probably just go straight to a business meeting with it. But so I guess the memo sooner rather than later would be appreciated. All right, anything else that you'd like to see added going forward? Keeping in mind that whatever we talked about last week we haven't had an agenda setting meeting yet. Joel?
I'm not sure we need to do it next meeting or next week or this month, but we need to, at a point in time, schedule the funding for counselors. We have it on the back, counselor pay. That was an item decided by 3 or 4 counselors, I think, to put on the agenda, and we haven't done that yet. So as we move forward, maybe we can consider that at Wednesday's session.
Sounds good. Anything else? All right. With that, how about if we have a motion to adjourn into that special council meeting? Valerie?
I make a motion we adjourn into a special council meeting.
Thank you. Second from Brian. All in favor of moving into the council meeting?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Welcome to the council meeting. Our action item today is a resolution that would approve the purchase of 2117 Allen Creek Road.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Joint presentation, I'm going to start it off, and Wade really is the one that has all the information associated with a potential scope change for your consideration as we close out on the acquisition of this property. This is a property you should be familiar with. It's one that we're executing our first right of refusal on, and the price is for $200,000. As we discussed earlier, in direction from council, is that we would move ahead, execute that first right of refusal, and do so based on the acquisition of potential future parkland, and doing that through that LB 6343. After that meeting, the wheels were turning when I was discussing this in this originally in executive session with council, and then subsequently had a meeting with Jason and Wade, and there is something that came to light that we wanted to bring to your attention that does not change the need for this property and the decision to purchase this property, but for the potential ultimate end use for this property. And with that, I'd like to have Wade come up, and he'll walk you through a couple of slides and talk to you about that.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So I was really excited when I saw this one come up. My wheels were certainly turning, and Jason's were too. This is in regards to the Allen Creek Road Improvement Project. So this project needs stormwater detention on it. So if you thought of this as like a subdivision, every new house has about 3,000 square foot of impervious surface area. Well, we're increasing the surface area of this road a lot, the equivalent of about 43 houses. So in essence, it's a subdivision of impervious surface. So as you can imagine, a 45 lot subdivision would have a pretty big stormwater detention facility. Well, we need one of those too. And so the first iteration, we knew we were going to need one of these, was to use one of the city-owned properties, which I'll show you in the subsequent slide. That's more of the general parkland area, to capture some of the stormwater facilities on the southern end of the project. It generally slopes down to the north side. But that wasn't going to be able to catch all of it, so we needed another one down towards the Harbeck intersection. And we were looking to maybe do a partnership with Aurelia subdivision down there to deepen, widen, and likely take over maintenance of their private facility, take care of the rest of it. So obviously it's not ideal to have two stormwater facilities, especially one of them being on private property. So this road will increase the impervious surface area, so we need to reduce it in conformance with our specifications as well as the state's. And then also the other key component to stormwater control is the stormwater quality, which is almost more important. So roads have a lot of, rubberized tire dust, they have a lot of oil, grease, and a lot of pollutants in general in them. So it's important that we run those through a facility that cleans the stormwater before it goes into the creek. In this case, it'd be Allen Creek and ultimately the Rogue River. So here's our first iteration. As you can see, that larger pond that's labeled Pond 1 was going to take up a large chunk of a potential future park or whatever else you guys decide to do with that property. And Pond 2 is that smaller one on your right side there. And that's actually on the property of the Aurelia subdivision, which has gone through land use planning. Not ideal. So when I saw this one come up, there was some landlocked city parcels that were generally on the northern portion of the project and could accommodate all of the stormwater detention. The only problem was we couldn't get any stormwater to them because we didn't have access. So this property would be great. It would serve several purposes for us. One would be that we could have access to get in there and pipe the stormwater in there, and it would also allow us to have access to maintain it over the years. Likely this would end up being some sort of a public access with trails and kind of serve as a park-like facility because there'd be a pond down there. So this project may also do a parking lot and other amenities The other key part of this, you'll see tax lot 1700 on the far left there, actually touches the creek, which is pretty important, so we didn't need some sort of a drainage easement to then discharge the cleaned and reduced volume of stormwater. So here's kind of an overview of what the pond may look like down there. Almost all of it will be on tax lot 1601, and a little bit of it spilling over potentially onto 2901. This isn't the final design. I had the consultant scrambling because this came up recently. But anyways, this is generally what it'll look like. So even better, I think, would be that our project, the Allen Creek Road Improvement Project, TR 6116, can pay for the entire property purchase, the building removal, the blight removal, all of the, I don't know if you guys noticed, there's a lot of debris on those properties, and general site cleanup, which will make it easier to use in the future with the extra space that we have in the area. So currently we have almost $3.25 million available in local funding for this project within that project. And ODOT has indicated that this may qualify for a local match for the other almost $7 million worth of federal and state funding we have. So it's money that we likely would have spent anyways on the project, still counts as a match and allows us to use the full amount of our federal revenues. So the call to action would be, you got a couple options here it looks like. One would be to approve the resolution authorizing the purchase of the property for future stormwater improvements through TR 6116, or to approve the resolution to purchase the property for future parkland out of LB 6343, or you could not approve the resolution. So at that, I'd take any questions you guys might have.
Thanks, Wade. Questions? Valerie?
Always. Mine's just a clarification, and thank you for this, Wade, and I'm excited about it as well. So basically what you're saying is because of the stormwater needs of this property in that area, that since we'll be using it as a future stormwater improvement site, we are able to fund it in a different way. So as opposed to funding it through the parks, we can fund it through this project, and it will act as a match as well. So it seems to me it's kind of like a no-brainer that would be the way to go about doing it. And it assures, because when you put in a stormwater area like this, that there will be some sort of park just that goes along with it, because it is a facility that needs to be maintained by the city. So I'm just clarifying that that's what you're saying, is basically you're taking the funding as opposed to doing a park acquisition and turning it over and saying we're doing it as a stormwater facility, and therefore ODOT can come along with us and help us to purchase that. Am I correct?
Yep, that's correct. And it appears that it's going to use a relatively small piece of those properties as well, so that doesn't limit a whole lot of future uses for it either.
Okay.
Or park for futures.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could take a real quick aside, I was listening earlier, and you guys had a question on the Allen Creek Road project, and here's our projected schedule on it, which shows that we look to bid it in the summer of '23, and we're on schedule right now. A lot of things need to come into place between now and then, but that's the schedule we're looking at.
All right, for questions, Brian, Vanessa, Rick.
So when we talked about this property, about acquiring this property, well, first of all, none of us talked about the stormwater option. That wasn't on the table at that point. We did talk about it for potentially future parkland, but the one thing that has not been brought up is it was also being considered for potential high-density residential out there. And so I don't see that being one of our options up there. But I certainly would think one of our options is still to buy that land and to not quite decide what to do with it today. So I was just a little confused on that. The question I actually had for Wade was around the size, acreage needed for retention ponds for Allen Creek.
I don't have a good number I can give you. It really depends. It's more about volume, so you could make it deeper if you have enough elevation before it gets to the creek and have a smaller footprint. Or you can make it wider and look more like a wetland, less like a pond. So we're not that far down design yet.
Okay, so it's still feasible that your original idea could work, is that correct?
Using the two different ponds?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, we could do that. It
Okay.
looked to me like it really affected some of our larger contiguous properties. So I thought this might be a better option.
Okay, thanks.
To answer your question about funding, if we were to purchase it with the parks funding and then turn it into residential property, we just need to pay back the parks fund in the future.
Yep.
Vanessa, then Rick.
That's a good segue to my question, is if the council did choose today to move forward with our original decision and purchase it through LB 6343, and in the future move forward with the proposed option today, could that fund reimburse the TR 6116?
Are you asking if the parks could reimburse this?
If we could essentially move it from the parks fund to the future stormwater improvement fund.
I'm not sure. I would think so.
I would think so as well. Adam, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I would just say, yes, one funding source could be traded for another. I'm not sure how that would affect the partnership that we referred to working with some external funding.
Thank you.
Rick?
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is very interesting and I'm fully supportive of it. I'm, again, when we discussed before, looking at possibly some high density residential in there. But the question I have for you is sort of out of the box thinking, while we developed this pond for stormwater purposes, could it become a feature for residential development to be built around it and use it as I don't want to say an attraction, but as something to observe? But I realize if you're putting water into it in the summertime, then in the wintertime it has to be empty in order to satisfy the stormwater needs. Could you have a regulator on there that could empty the water out with anticipation of winter flow? Yeah, I think all of those are possibilities, Counselor. And if I can take us back to, I'm on the wrong one. Depending upon what you guys end up wanting to do with it, there's a lot of property that's not being used here. And so essentially we would cut a road in there and probably put some sort of parking lot, and then what happens from there, there's a lot of options. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Val?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to what Brian and Vanessa talked about if we bought it through the parks and then whatever. At what point would ODOT need to know? Does it matter to them? Was it, because they're currently like buying property and that sort of thing right away, if I'm not mistaken, right now. So will they want to know right away? Will that make a difference in terms of them paying for, them helping to come along with it? Whether we do it ourselves or we do it with them?
Really, the sooner would be better, because we're in the middle of the design, and if I can bring over this Excel sheet again, we can do whatever we need to do to make the right choice here, but the actual, if you look up the top here, the DAP complete, we're coming up on that date reasonably quick, which is draft something plan. I forget ODOT's acronyms, but the sooner we can get these things ironed out, the easier it is to actually design it and move forward with the project. So if we're kind of in limbo on where the stormwater's going, it'll delay the design.
Aaron?
Hi. I just want to sort of recap what I've heard so far from staff. It's a question that I didn't fully ask before we came to the meeting based on council's discussion also. We were originally going to move forward with just purchasing it with parkland because that rest was contiguous park, and then if it's ultimately if it's ultimately residential, then parks would get reimbursed for that purchase. So my understanding of this is if we utilize this as stormwater, one, we're getting some equity in that because it's going to be a match, or it's going to a state program where we might actually get some match funds also. So it's a positive from that perspective, working this in as a needed stormwater infrastructure. And so that's the one clarification which I think I'm getting a yes on. The second one is no matter what, there's going to have to be stormwater. Now, one of the questions is it going to be on our property? Is it going to be on another subdivision's property that we're going to have to take over ownership of? That's going to be an encumbrance on the development of someone's property. And then also, it's within a neighborhood that is whatever that we're taking care of. So from an efficiency standpoint, staff would recommend this is the most efficient because it's one that we own. It doesn't prohibit potential residential, but it also doesn't encumber a potential private development to have to put in stormwater infrastructure because we would do it here. Is that a correct statement?
It is. And also I would note that we still need 2 ponds. If we don't use that configuration, we still need 2 ponds just because of the general topography. So we can't, this isn't large enough to put all the stormwater down here by Harbeck, so we're still going to need a second pond in this instance up to the south somewhere, which is still on city property, unless we wanted to try to put it on somebody else's private property. But so we need it one way or the other.
Valerie, then Joel.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add, you know, and I will say this because I've heard this in many developers' world, that as soon as stormwater is huge, and as soon as you've got to start to deal with that, that kind of holds things up. So anything that we can do, no different than putting infrastructure or whatever, anything we can do on our lot will just make that build out faster. So it will build housing will come faster if the stormwater's developed ahead of time and that piece is kind of done. So I agree with the efficiency, and that anything we can do now will just make that development happen faster than it might otherwise happen.
Joel?
I don't know if we're past the question stage, but
I thought we were still in questions,
okay.
but.
So I'll ask it as a question. So then, if you minimize the footprint of the pond, dig it deep as you can with your design, you still have adequate land there, that, it looks like, for either multi-unit housing, or if you wanted to convert it to a park. But the initial funding for it would come from stormwater, and the price would be reduced to the city because we'd get the match from ODOT. Is that correct?
Yeah, generally that's correct. The money we're still going to have plenty of local funds to spend on the actual project itself. So this helps us, make sure we can use all our federal funding, but likely we don't need this to make sure that we take advantage of the federal funds either, which is kind of part of the project.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Sounds good.
Thanks.
Kurt, then Brian.
How much flow will this add to Allen Creek?
Well, it's, I guess we'd really be diving into the weeds on stormwater. I don't know that for sure. So what we would usually do in a design is that, and all the developers do as well when they're doing these facilities, is that they limit the outflow to what it was pre-development. So if we took this ground before even the original Allen Creek Road was there, and we took a design storm of 20 years and an hour or whatever, the volume that would run off of that ground is all that we can allow to go into the Allen Creek in this instance. What we do, though, to counteract that is we store extra volume in a pond or oversized pipe or something like that with a restricted orifice that only lets so much out. So we design our design storms in the pond to hold all that extra water and then meter it out at a slower rate. So to get back to your question, it will increase the volume of water that goes into Allen Creek, but it won't go there any faster or at a higher cubic feet per second volume than it would have before.
Won't increase the peak flow.
So there's no point downstream of Allen Creek where it would change the volume?
No.
Okay.
Brian.
So just to be clear on the external funding piece, are you saying that it's not really a factor? Like we're going to be getting those matching grant funds on this project either way?
Very likely. What it would do is, if we can reach that match faster and the project comes in at or slightly under budget, then we could turn back some of our gas tax and other local funding to other important projects, because we'd be able to use all of it for sure.
Okay, and then on these particular parcels, if, say, we decide we want housing on there in addition to the stormwater, that housing would also have to have additional stormwater facilities, correct?
Absolutely. At which point, hopefully this pond could accommodate it.
Okay, I have comment, but I'll stop at questions.
Okay, does anybody else have questions, particularly if they're pertinent to this funding purchase decision? No?
Thank you.
All right, we'll start discussion. Go ahead, Brian.
Wade, could you put the map back up, the larger map that shows, I guess it was the whole Allen Creek area?
Mayor, point of order. Do we need to open to the public?
Oh, you're right, we do actually. Thank you. Is there anyone from the public who wanted to speak on this issue? All right, we'll close public comment, but thanks, Rick. Go ahead, Brian.
So I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm against putting stormwater there. Given what Wade said, I don't know that we need to decide that piece today. The reason that I have concern is if you look at that map of Allen Creek, the right side, I don't know if you can read it, but the right side parcel is the future Aurelia subdivision, which is the northernmost piece. That is R4 zoning at that end. And as this area is going to be rezoned, and Housing Committee is making recommendations on what that rezone is going to look like. But generally, what it's going to look like is it's going to be R4 on the right, and as you get more to the left, it's going to go to R3 and R2. So those parcels that we have that we're talking about are very close to the existing R4, which lend themselves to the highest density area of the Allen Creek development. So I just have a little bit of reservations about, deciding today to take our city-owned property that has the highest density potential and turning it into stormwater. But I'm certainly in favor of buying the parcel.
Rick, then Vanessa.
Brian, I like your comments, but also I see the water being a water feature, so I think that could be a real attraction to being a plus, complementing the high-density development. Thank you.
Vanessa?
That's kind of the concern that I have also is not planning this strategically and holistically. So I support moving forward with purchasing the property, but I don't know that we have to make plans for the property today.
Brian?
I just wanted to respond to Rick. Those properties already have a water feature. It's called Allen Creek.
Any further discussion? Valerie?
Well, just from my experience in working in transportation and working with getting things done fast, I really don't necessarily feel that it's going to really take away from it. I would agree with Rick. I think we need workforce housing, we need housing, at all levels. So I think having something with a feature like that might be a real plus for our workforce housing and bringing other types of housing in as well. I think myself that with ODOT and the stormwater and the design phase that we're in right now, the quicker we can make a decision knowing that everything will need, that we have to have a stormwater, that if we can move forward on it, know what's going to be there, that the design phase and the zoning phase and everything will move that much quicker, which will allow it to happen faster. So I think I'm going to make a motion, as a matter of fact. I'm going to make a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the purchase of 2117 Allen Creek Road for future stormwater improvements using TR 6116.
All right, is there a second? Kurt? Any discussion on your motion? Rick?
I like the motion and I will be supporting it. And part of the reason Wade, I believe, alluded to the fact if we don't have this piece of property for this stormwater project here, we may have to move it further south to where we have designated parkland. And I hate to take up that parkland and restrict the use there because that piece could even be bigger if we had to move the stormwater down there. So that is one of the reasons I'm in favor of this. Thank you.
Brian?
I'm just looking for clarity on the motion. The motion didn't say anything about the intended purpose of the property. It just says that we're purchasing it.
The funding source was the stormwater funding source, TR 6116.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Further discussion? Vanessa?
Just the very last presentation, if anyone has read the buildable land inventory, the amount of high-density land that we have is scarce, and we have to be very intentional with how that land is developed, seeing as we don't have very much left of it. So for that, I will be voting no.
Brian?
Also, Housing Advisory, Allen Creek has been referred to them for their opinion on how to rezone that once it comes into the city. So it doesn't seem like the right steps to do this with the property before we know what the potential zoning is. And actually, having the main stormwater pond on our bigger parcel to the south where it's lower density, where we have more land that more realistically will be a park, I think that is a more natural fitting for a stormwater pond, and we have an excess of space there. And that part of Allen Creek is probably going to be R2. So I would much rather have the stormwater facilities on R2 than I would on R3 or R4, just so we can continue to work towards our housing goals.
Valerie?
Well, I would just say what I've always said is when our city, who the stormwater people, who are the professionals who know about that and the needs of developers, that is who I'm going to go to first. And my feeling strongly is if that's what they recommend, because they realize what a boon it will be to anybody who will be building out there to have the stormwater ironed out ahead of time, that development once more will happen more quickly and smoother and will happen at a faster rate. And once again, having a feature of some sort with water is a true incentive, and I think we need all levels of housing, and I think R4 will fit great on there with that feature.
Is there further discussion? Brian?
I don't think anybody's trying to slow down anything. I think we have two options for where to put the stormwater, and I think either one, there's no slowing down happening. You know, are we going to put it over here, or are we going to put it over there? There's no delay involved, so that's not really a factor in the decision. I just wanted to clear that up.
Any further discussion? All right, so the motion was to approve the resolution that would authorize the purchase of 2117 Allen Creek Road for future storm water improvements using TR 6116 as the funding source. Valerie, how do you vote?
Yes.
Brian?
No.
Rick?
Yes, for reasons stated.
Rob?
No.
Vanessa?
No.
Joel?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-3. Anything further on this? All right, how about a motion to adjourn? Valerie?
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. Second? Kurt, thank you. And all in favor of adjourning today's meeting?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, good job. 1:48, everybody. I will see you next Monday. Thank you.